We're just going to wait. We're just going to wait a few minutes to allow people to come in.
Hola a todos, nada más vamos a esperar unos minutos más para que lleguen las personas.
Good morning again. I'm just waiting a couple more minutes.
Buenos días. Nada más estoy esperando unos minutos para que los participantes se unan a la llamada.
Okay, I think we'll get started, given that we only
entonces vamos a empezar, ya que solamente tenemos 50 minutos. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a este evento paralelo sobre el impacto del encarcelamiento en los miembros de la familia. Es coorganizado por el IDPC, WOLA y REMOVE, la red nacional de personas con familiares en la prisión. Me llamo Coleta Youngers. Entonces, las presentaciones se van a dar en español. Así que si quieren interpretación, por favor, seleccionen en el botón que aparece en la parte de abajo de la pantalla.
You need to switch to the Zoom link. Go to the
y entonces voy a decir todo esto en español.
Tenga en cuenta que las presentaciones serán en español, excepto para mí. Si necesita traducción, vaya al botón de interpretación en la esquina inferior derecha de la pantalla. Si está escuchando en el canal de YouTube de WOLA y necesita interpretación, debe cambiar al enlace de Zoom. Vaya a la página de web de WOLA, la pestaña que dice Involúcrese, luego Eventos, y se puede registrar. Okay, going back to English now. Before going any further, I would just like to say on behalf of WOLA and IDPC, I would just like to take a moment to recognize the massive humanitarian and human rights crisis taking place in Ukraine, as well as massive displacement. Homes, apartment buildings, hospitals, and schools are being bombed. In cities where active military actions are taking place, people don't have access to basic needs like food, water, and essential medicines. With regards to drugs, organizations that provide harm reduction and HIV prevention services are courageously trying to continue their work, but face tremendous obstacles. WOLA and IDPC stand today in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. This war must end. Returning to the topic of our side event, in recent years, we've organized side events highlighting the disproportionate impact of drug-related incarceration on women. This year, we want to focus on the disproportionate impact of drug-related incarceration on the children and families of people deprived of liberty. To my knowledge, this is the first CND side event focusing on this topic, and we hope it brings visibility to the issue and to the terrific work being done by REMOVE and the NAPES platform, who are with us here today. I'm not going to say any more about the topic due to our time limitations today. This side event will begin with opening remarks by the ambassador to the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the international organizations in Vienna, and that will be followed by presentations on the lived experiences of family members of people in prison and proposals for alternative approaches. I will introduce each speaker before they talk, and you can put questions in the chat or use the Q&A function, although I will warn you that we'll just have a few minutes for questions at the end, given the time limitations of these side events. So our first presenter is Ambassador Luis Javier Camposano Pina, who entered the Foreign Service in 1989. He was accredited to the Embassy of Mexico in Austria UNOV, which is the Permanent Mission of Mexico in New York and the Permanent Mission to the International Organizations in Geneva. From June 2006 to November 2009, he was Deputy Permanent Representative of the mission to the OAS in Washington, D.C. In September 2011, he was promoted to the rank of ambassador. He served as the ambassador of Mexico, in Norway, Director General for the United Nations at the Mexican Foreign Ministry, and the counselor and the counselor at the Vice Ministry of Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights. And since June 2020, he has served as the ambassador of Mexico in Austria and permanent representative to the international organizations in Vienna. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias. Quiero expresar el reconocimiento.
Thank you very much. I would like to express my country's gratitude for the organizers of this event. And it's a good opportunity to be able to participate in this forum with members of civil society and people affected by these topics. And like many things in life, my role as a politician or a policymaker is related to many different contradictions. All of our roles are based in human rights, but we see that there are many contradictions when it comes to actually implementing these rights. We need to hold our national governments accountable. When I was looking at the overall themes here, I was really moved by the different personal testimonies and stories here, because these aren't just national laws, but it also has to do with our own compassion and about the people who have to suffer injustice and disproportionate effects under the law and the current policies that we have. The NAPES platform and the Church World Service helped to organize this event. And we're really hoping to see awareness raised about the cruel reality of the impact on family members of people who are deprived of liberty or who have been accused of crimes, especially women who are often overrepresented in prisons, often for drug-related offenses, and often have to be the carers and be the ones supporting family members who are incarcerated. These situations can have very severe effects on human rights, both on the people who are deprived of their liberty and on their family members. In terms of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, these provisions are very relevant here. We see many injustices. For example, the imprisonment of people who are completely innocent, which has devastating impacts on their children. Second, we also see how people can be punished, people who are completely innocent, and this also has a devastating impact on children and mothers. We need to recognize that there's a combination here of objectivity and subjectivity, and there's a lot of egotism as well on the part of policymakers. But we really need to recognize that these policies don't only affect one person in a vacuum, they also affect the people around them and their loved ones. It's extremely important to emphasize the impact that this has on the struggle for social justice and rights. Many times, women are the ones who are left with the sole responsibility for caring for their families and caring for the loved ones in prison. Many times, human rights violations are very much linked to these situations and the unfair circumstances under which people are imprisoned. We have to ask ourselves, if I were an imprisoned woman, what would I do? If I had to be separated from my child, what would I do during these times? When we look at the impact on women and the rest of the members of their family, these are extremely important themes.
Very much, Ambassador. We very much appreciate the sponsorship, the co-sponsorship of the Mexican government, and your taking time out of the very busy day at the CND to be with us here today. I have been reminded that I'm talking too fast for the interpreter. So I would just like to remind our speakers as well that we need to talk slowly so that our interpreter can catch all our words. Our next speaker is Andrea Casamento. Her son was mistakenly incarcerated in 2007 in Argentina. Since she didn't find an organization or public office that could help her, she created ACIFAD, the Civil Association for Relatives of People in Prison. ACIFAD today is a community-based organization in Buenos Aires, led by and dedicated to the needs of women and children with incarcerated loved ones. Andrea is also a founding member of Remove, a new network of 7 organizations in Latin America and Spain, led by women who are family members of people deprived of liberty. In 2021, she was selected as a member of the UN Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture. It's the first time that somebody from a directly affected community is a member of that subcommittee. Andrea's work and life has been featured in the media. She has spoken at many conferences and seminars to share her experiences, including here in the United States. And she was selected to present at the TEDx Rio de la Plata event, where she shared her story in front of 10,000 people. So Andrea, our audience isn't quite that big today, but I turn the floor over to you. And again, just remind you to speak slowly.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Walla, thank you Pauletta for all of the support that you've given us and for giving us the opportunity to really raise awareness on how imprisonment affects family members. In Argentina, there are about 100,000 people deprived of liberty. But when it comes to imprisonment, we estimate that for every person who is detained, 5 people within their family are also impacted. And this impact falls disproportionately on women who are also caretakers and guardians and parents taking care of their children. Many people who are currently, they might be a grandmother, for example. They have to take care of other family members, and this is something that the state does not recognize. One of the issues that most worries us has to do with that link. The way that family ties are completely destroyed for children. It's very difficult for families to be able to enter prisons, to be able to visit family members, to be able to maintain those familial relationships. Another thing that is extremely worrying is that there's no work being done to support these women, these children, to address the impacts that this has on them. And so, as Coletta was telling us in her presentation, we created the Argentinian Civil Association for Relatives of Prisoners, or ACIFAD. But we've also worked with, we have colleagues, for example, Lucia in Mexico. There are many other countries. We realized that maybe those different countries, we have a different accent, we might be different, but this exact same situation, it's something that we're all going through. It's not just a systemic problem. It's not a problem exclusive to Argentina or Mexico or Uruguay. It's throughout the region. We see how imprisonment has a devastating impact on families, or the family members who are accompanying and supporting people who are deprived of liberty. Here, I'm not talking just about subjective impact on the person who is deprived of liberty. It also affects the economic status of the family, because many times the person who is imprisoned is the one who was working to provide for them. They have to take a lot of time as well to go to the courthouse. There's a lot of obstacles and barriers to accessing justice, and it's quite a difficult topic. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about the, right now we're working with the NAPIS platform, and we say that, you know, we need to support our children in terms of addressing the impacts that they suffer. There's 2 things here that are important to point out. In Argentina and some other countries in the region, there's a law that's being proposed for home arrest. The problem is that there aren't programs that help support those mothers and their children. So there are actually women here in Argentina who prefer to be imprisoned than to be at home, because if they were at home, there's no one to bring them food, there's no one to support them. They're stuck in their homes, but they can't even leave to take their children to school. We need to think of developing a program to be able to support women in this situation. And another thing very important, just yesterday we had a meeting, and one of the topics that came up was mental health of people who are in or exiting prisons. This is something that hasn't been broached at all. And there's many people as well who need access to medications, but they don't have a psychiatrist's prescription. It's really a topic, an issue that we need to have in mind. And when we're talking about drug policy, it's also true. I think that about 70% of people who are deprived of liberty, at least in Argentina, have some sort of drug dependency issues. And there is no opportunity at all to be able to work on these issues and help access treatment when they're in these situations, when they're in prison. Many of these women are in prison because they have a drug dependency issue, and they were arrested and detained for possession simply for personal use. I think we need to start thinking of how we can support these women, how we can ask the government, so that public policy that we have outside of the prisons also reaches the people within prisons. Some of the strategies that we've thought of, for example, in the NAPES platform, the Remove network, is to speak about these issues, broach these topics, and also carry out analyses of what are the most pressing issues here, raise awareness, and also engage in advocacy so that we can push for the changes that need to be made. So I think that's all. I'm open to answering questions if there's any time for that. And thank you so much for giving me this space to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I just want to underscore two things that you said. One is what you were just talking about with regards to people who have drug dependencies who end up in prison, and how we should be providing, or governments should be providing, resources to fund harm reduction and treatment programs before people go into prison. One of the organizations that we work with in Argentina that's doing a very good job on these issues is Intercambios Asociación Civil Argentina. So I just want to give a shout out to them. And the other thing you mentioned that I've found in my own work is that, you know, when with the organization that you have brought together, Remove, of family members with people in prison, and the Plataforma NAPES, and then the other network that we work with, which is the Latin American network of women who have been behind bars. What we find is that the experiences of women's incarceration, people's incarceration, family members, is remarkably similar. It doesn't matter what country you are from. And I've found this to be the case worldwide, because we're also working with an international network of women who've been in prison. And it was striking to me that, you know, women in Africa, women in Asia, women in Latin America, despite the tremendous differences, women's experience of incarceration is remarkably horrendous and remarkably similar. So we'll turn now to our next speaker. And I would just like to remind everybody that you can put questions either in the chat or in the Q&A. We will have a little bit of time at the end for some questions. So our next speaker is Lucia Alvarado. Lucia is the sister of a person who was deprived of liberty for drug-related issues in Mexico. From 2014 to 2016, she was part of the group that advocated for the adoption of the National Law of Penal Execution, LNEP, to recognize and include the rights of family members in the legislation. Since 2018, she has managed the Center for Integral Attention of Relatives of Persons Deprived of Liberty, CAIFAM, which is part of the civil society organization Documenta. CAIFAM aims to train and inform relatives about the mechanisms within the LNEP for the defense of rights of people in prison and serves as a space of resistance and solidarity among peers. CAIFAM is also part of the Remove Network. Because of the very early hour in Mexico right now, we have a video of Lucia's presentation, but she is here with us to answer any questions that come up. So Isa, I turn it to you to put the video on.
Buenos días, soy Lucia Alvarado y soy
Hello,
hermana de una persona que
I am Lucia Alvarado, and I am the sister of a person who was deprived of liberty for 10 years for crimes related to drug policy in my country. In recent years, imprisonment has increased due to a constitutional reform to increase the capital of crimes that merit automatic preventive detention or pretrial detention. Some of these are related to drug policy here in Mexico. This situation has favored or led to a disproportionate increase of people in prison, even in the midst of a pandemic, because prosecutors in my country prefer to send people to prison rather than opting for alternative measures. In Mexico, there are currently 216,310 people deprived of liberty in the different municipal, state, and federal penitentiaries. Of this population, more than 40% of these people are in pretrial detention without having been proven to have committed a crime or not. According to the National Mexican Institute of Statistics, almost 8% of people are in prison for a drug-related crime, and 50% of the women deprived of their liberty are in the federal prisons in the country are related to drug-related charges. It is worth noting that according to the statistic, the people who are in prison for these crimes are not the big drug kingpins, but rather people, mostly young people, for simple possession of minor amounts of marijuana and cocaine. The impact of having a loved one in prison has a large effect on our rights in various aspects, both social and emotional. Both the person who is imprisoned and all the members of his or her family are affected. It negatively influences the integral development of children, further impoverishes families, and violates the right to justice. This situation completely disrupts our lives, and after these moments, nothing will ever be the same. I'm going to put the Mexican situation in context to highlight the critical human rights movement we are facing in the face of mass incarceration. In 2008, the first letter of agreement was signed on an initiative through which the US Congress would support the Mexican government's state against drug trafficking and organized crime, as well as to promote respect for human rights and the rule of law, which is something that has yet to materialize. As part of this initiative, there is a corrections program aimed at building maximum security federal prisons. These new federal centers have already been built in inaccessible areas due to their remoteness from urban centers. This has led to a wave of mass transfers to these new federal prisons, leading to a series of systematic violations of the human rights of prisoners and their families. Because they are taken away from their emotional core, since being transferred makes it difficult to attend visits with the planning necessary. Because going to visit also entails a series of expenses for transport that many times we are unable to cover. On the other hand, the greatest impact is the almost immediate and irremediable break in the emotional ties with their children, and the great psychological repercussions their children suffer because they think they have been abandoned or that they do not want to be near them, and that the prisoner decided to leave of his or her own free will. In state prisons, the expenses we have to cover are very high because we have to bring everything in order for our family member to survive, including food, drinkable water, medicine, clothes, blankets, money to pay for a place to sleep in a cell with massive sanitation and health problems. in addition to other costs linked to the rampant corruption that occurs daily in the penitentiary centers. When we visit, we are subjected to intrusive body searches, and we are criminalized and stigmatized for having a relationship with people deprived of liberty. The vast majority of us who accompany a loved one in prison are women. And every day we face psychological violence in the courts, where we receive despotic treatment on the part of lawyers and judges when we don't understand the complicated legal language they use. And when we go to prisons to visit, we are mistreated by administrative custody staff. It is necessary to combat corruption, impunity, self-government, and violence that prevails within prisons. But it is also extremely urgent and important that we create public policies that contribute to mitigating the effects on the families of persons deprived of liberty, forming institutions that provide legal and psychosocial support so as to not continue be made invisible and stigmatized as the collateral damage of a useless drug war, which has only left thousands of people missing, dead, or in prison. For the past 4 years, I've been coordinator of CAIFAM, which is the Center for Integral Attention to Families of Persons Deprived of Liberty in Mexico. It's a group formed by women family members created at the end of 2018. And we came together with the intention of learning about our rights and those of our imprisoned family members in order to make sure that their rights can be exercised. With this, we have managed to have an impact on the national law of penal enforcement and to become self-governing. Our meetings serve to solidify solidarity between us, to make visible the impact of incarceration on our lives, create political alliances, and influence public policies to ensure that prisons comply with human rights standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for that very good presentation. As we were just commenting, or as I was just commenting with regards to Andrea's presentation, I was struck by what you were saying about the way in which family members are treated by the judiciary and in the prisons. And I think this is also a very universal problem. You find this across the region. And I'm also very glad that you brought up the role of the US government. You know, we also find the adoption of US style maximum security prisons around the region. And there are many issues we could go into about that, but the one I just want to mention, because this is happening in Mexico as is the case in other countries, is often these prisons are built in places that are very far from where people live, as we have in the situation we have in the United States, where people are sent to prisons that may be thousands of miles from their families, in the case of big countries like the United States and Mexico, or hundreds of miles, I should say. And it makes it very, very hard to maintain those family links. And we all know from the many studies that have been done, at least in the United States, that maintaining family links is one of the most, and family relationships is one of the most important factors in ensuring that when people are released from prison, that they are able to rebuild their lives and not end up back in prison. So thank you for that. Our final presentation is a video by two representatives of the Plataforma NAPES. And I would also like to note that we have Leah Fernandez of the Plataforma here with us for any questions about the presentations you are about to hear now. These presentations are by two adolescents who work with the Plataforma. The first speaker will be Cruz Alejandra Jimenez Sierra. She is 13 years old and from the Dominican Republic. Her interests are drawing and cooking. She loves animals and has a little dog named Princesa. When she grows up, she would like to be a soldier to help others. Currently, she's a sophomore in high school. Her father is deprived of his liberty, and she and other children are accompanied by the organization Proyecto Caminante from the Dominican Republic. At the time of his arrest, she was with her sister, also a minor, watching television, and they were both there when her father was taken away. As you will hear from her, the arrest had a great emotional impact on her and her sister. It's been about 6 years since that time, and her father is still incarcerated. And the second person you will hear from is Manuel Fletas, who is 16 years old and from Uruguay. He has 3 younger siblings. His mother was sentenced to 4 years in prison for bringing 50 grams of marijuana into a men's prison. I would note that marijuana is legal in Uruguay. She is a single mother and had no criminal record until this point. With the support of the organization Gurises Unidos, an alliance with the Parliamentary Commissioner for Penitentiary Issues, and with the Strategic Litigation Clinic of the University of the Republic, Manuel's mother was granted house arrest. This was an unprecedented achievement in the country of Uruguay, and it will allow the children to stay with their mother. Manuel, together with other adolescents, filed an amicus brief, the first of its kind, before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in March 2020, highlighting the impact of the deprivation of liberty of their guardians and on children at an international level. So again, I remind you, you can put questions in the chat and Q&A, and let's start the video.
My name is Cruz Alejandra Jimenez Sierra, and I am 13 years old. And I am from the Dominican Republic. I'm a representative of children and adolescents who have a family member who is deprived of liberty. When they took my father, they took my mother and my sister as well. And it made life very difficult for the other 2 children, the younger ones, because we didn't have any information about what had happened with our father, with our mother and our sister. But they took us to many different areas to be able to distract us a bit and to forget those horrible sights that we saw. I live in Boca Chica, and in order to go and enter to Victoria, which is the name of the prison, it's very far away from us. We have to get up extremely early to be able to get there early. It's very far away from my house to get to the prison. We have to waste about $100 in order to be able to go there. And there, people are lined up in a very large queue to be able to enter the prison, and the queue goes even further. So once we get inside, in the area inside, we have to pay them so that there's no issues with anything, with food, because they look through everything and they really mess up and disorganize everything that you bring with you. When you get in, you have to pay so that they don't touch the minors when they're frisking us, because sometimes they will touch you in your private areas and it's not comfortable. It's something that has happened to me before. They also give us very little time to be able to be with our family members. We get very little time, and also the environment that we're in is not so safe because it's in the middle of the recreational area, and there's many different gangs there. They have revolvers, they have pistols, they have weapons to assault each other with, and they will assault the guards as well. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Manuel Fletas. I'm 16 years old and I live in Uruguay. I'm part of Gurises Unidos and the NAPES platform. The situation started when my mother tried to enter prison and they caught her. This situation affects me emotionally because I do not know what's going to happen to my family or what's going to happen to me. After a very long journey in the criminal courts where I was trying to protect my rights and those of my siblings, even though they hadn't asked us anything about our interest in the situation, thanks to the support of Gurises Unidos, we reached the settlement of being able to give my mother 4 years of house arrest This way we were able to avoid having my family be separated and therefore avoid lasting damage both in the present and the future. The process was very long, complicated, and random. It was full of uncertainty because we didn't know what was going to happen. I felt very sad because it was so difficult, everything we were going through, and also fear because I didn't know whether things were going to get more difficult for us. And there are some rights that were violated throughout this process, like the right to live in a family unit. And there were many different opportunities to violate this right because there wasn't anyone in my family who could stay with us. The separation wasn't only possible in terms of my mother, but it was also something that affected my siblings, and we didn't know where we were going to end up. We didn't even know whether we were going to be able to see each other. Furthermore, my interests and those of my siblings, in terms of wanting to live together and not wanting to be separated from our mother, this right was also violated. I'd like them to change the schedule so that they gave a little bit more time for visitors. I'd also like for them to provide transport so that we can go straight to Victoria and not have to spend so much money in order to get there. I'd also like for there to be a more comfortable and safe environment. Because when we go out into the outside areas, like I said before, there's many problems there. And in many prisons, I'd like for them to put a more private area where we can visit our family members. Private area and more comfortable, where children and family can feel more comfortable inside. They also need to improve the policies within prisons so that they can search us without touching us inappropriately, neither adults nor minors. I also would like them to stop arresting almost nearly every family member that is there, because that doesn't mean, if one person commits a mistake or makes a mistake, that doesn't mean that everyone should be affected by it when it wasn't their fault. And they need to take our interests into account, and also the impact that is had on us outside of prisons. There are people who insult us, who bully us, even our teachers as well. They will insult us, they'll say horrible things to us, and they don't treat us as they should. My mother has to work. It's like she's my mother and my father. She suffered a lot due to this situation. I'd like them to change the situation so for children who have parents who are deprived of liberty, so that we can feel safer expressing our needs, and so that there's more awareness of what's going on in our different countries. I'm Cruz Alejandra Jimenez Sierra, and thank you for giving me the space to speak to you. So I would like, through this work, I would like to reach different people, to raise awareness so that they can empathize with the minors, the children who are affected throughout these processes. I appreciate having the opportunity to have this space to share my story. And I hope that my story reaches the ears of other people so that we can secure a better future for children and adolescents from different parts of the world who have similar stories.
It's so important to hear directly from these kids, and I just applaud their bravery in speaking out and becoming activists at such a young age. It's so impressive. I also want to underscore the importance of Manuel's mother's case. I remember an Uruguayan judge in a forum we hosted some years ago now saying that although the law allowed for house arrest, there were no mechanisms in place to actually implement it. this is the first case, as I said before. This is a big step forward. At the same, because it will allow him to stay, with his mother, for he and his siblings. I think at the same time, it's very important to recognize that house arrest can also be as harsh as prison if people are not given the flexibility to work and carry out their responsibilities as parents. We put out a report on this a couple of years ago, with numerous other organizations in the region, and CELS in Argentina also put out a very good report about the difficulties that women have in house arrest if they can't work in order to be able to maintain themselves, the problems it creates within the households, because of course house arrest means that everybody in the household is at some level under the criminal legal system. And if they can't perform their parental responsibilities, can't work and carry out their responsibilities as parents. So I think this points to the need for alternatives to incarceration, but I think we also need to think beyond house arrest and how we can ensure that women and children are able to stay together. We have a few minutes for questions, and let me see. So I think what I'm going to do is a round of questions and let everybody, all of the speakers participate, including Leah Fernandez from the Plataforma NAPES. I have one question for the ambassador, which is, what else can we do? Do you think that we can do to give more visibility to this issue within the Commission on Narcotic Drugs and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime more broadly? So if you could think about that for a minute, I'd be very interested in what you would have to say about that, because we certainly want to follow up on this event, and as we have with the issue of women in prison within the CND. There are two questions in the chat by Corina. I'm going to read them in Spanish since that is the language that they are in. Tengo dos preguntas.
I have two questions. This issue of sorry, I cannot see the question. I think that it would be interesting for to hear how we can best support the children with which we're working. And the second question is, what are the obstacles that people face? What are the issues that people should face when they are released from prison and return home? It's very interesting for me to hear the stories of people who are affected by this. I think that this would be a good question for Andrea and Lucia. Okay, now I'm switching to English.
As family members of people in prison, do you consider that regional and international mechanisms such as the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights are a good way to demand accountability for violations of the rights of family members of people in prison? And I think this opens up a reflection more broadly about what your organizations may have done, particularly within the Inter-American system of human rights, and what you found to be helpful, and what are perhaps some of the obstacles that you have faced. So I don't see any other questions in the chat right now, so I will turn it over. I think I'll just go in the same order as the presentations, and we can start with the ambassador.
Muchísimas gracias, Coleta, y muchísimas
Thank you, Coleta. Thank you to all of the people who spoke today. And as we've mentioned, it's a huge honor to be able to hear direct testimonies, and it's very courageous on the part of these people for sharing their stories and what they've gone through. In terms of this, to respond to your question, one important point is to strengthen our observance of the Bangkok rules. Another important point is strengthening all of the gender-sensitive approaches in our work. in accordance with the UNODC recommendations, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and within programs and the projects that are linked to this subject, we need to strengthen them across the board, raise awareness about these situations, and also raise awareness about alternative measures to imprisonment. It's important to work together with civil society organizations. For example, in Mexico, we have one that also helps to reintegrate women into society through work, so that they can better face, because they face a lot of discrimination when they get out of prisons, and it can be very difficult for them to secure employment. So it's very important to provide them that support. Another very important point that is being considered in various spheres is to change imprisonment, to exchange imprisonment for a different alternative measurements. Imprisonment should not be the go-to response, especially when we are talking about people who are first offenders, or people who have small amounts of narcotic drugs. Or people who are working as drug mules, as they are called. We need to have much more benign alternative measures that also take into account these issues of society at large, and also maintaining the integrity of the family unit.
Ambassador, those were all very helpful suggestions. Andrea, I turn it over to you now.
A ver, para mí
Let's see. Prisons are very they basically they very much disable people. They impede people from many different things. After someone has been in prison for a long time without being able to make decisions, without being able to being subjected to many different regulations, it's difficult for the person to re-enter society. And it's also very difficult for their family who has learned how to live in a certain way and under a certain context. And there aren't any programs or mechanisms that help support people through this project, or through this process. I'm going to give you an example. My husband was incarcerated for 16 years, and 2 years ago he came home. One of the things that we did, we would leave all the lights on. When I asked why they did that, he said, well, in prison we don't pay for the electricity bill. So that's an example. We have to learn how to live. Because when you're with someone who has been in prison for a long time, and then all of a sudden they're living again with their wife, with their children who go to school, they have to learn everything. And there is absolutely no one who helps us throughout that process of learning to live in society again. And it's very, very difficult, because in addition, we always feel, we sense people looking at us with people. He will say, can people tell that I was a prisoner, that I was imprisoned? We always have that kind of stigmatizing, those stigmatizing eyes on us. It's also very difficult to secure employment when you have a criminal record. There's many things that you're limited from being able to do. And in terms of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, this question that was asked, I'm a member of the subcommittee on the prevention of torture of the UN. And a little over a year ago, I joined. One of the topics that the experts speak about they say, have you spoken with the members of the family? And then they'll say, no, we didn't think to do that. But you have to speak with the children. You have to ask them how they're doing. How are they coping with the situation? And then these people say, no, we hadn't even thought of that. So there's really not enough awareness about the collateral damage that is done by incarceration, the collateral damage on family members. So when the children went before the Inter-American Court, all of these kinds of initiatives, these kinds of initiatives that we are carrying out are very important. Our organization was one of the first 14 years ago. Remove is new, it's only about 2 years old. So we need to become the protagonists of our own stories. We have to strengthen ourselves. We have to make sure that our voices are heard, and that our participation is counted with when we're making recommendations on this topic.
To have people like yourself, people who come from directly impacted communities in the places such as the UN Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture. We're going to go just a few minutes longer so that we can hear from 2 more speakers. So please stick around for a few more minutes. And Lucia, I turn it over to you.
I wanted to add from my perspective, and also the very specific situation that we had with my brother when he came out of prison, of how prisons are managed. All of the time, my family member was imprisoned for 10 years, and there was never any plan of activities within the prisons. There weren't any activities or programs so that people had the skills that they needed to be able to reintegrate successfully into society, to be able to secure employment. And this was a huge problem for my brother, who was spending 10 years drawing Disney cartoons, and he didn't have any of the skills to be able to reintegrate into society and to be able to find a job. This was a huge problem that affected his entire prison sentence. Also, in terms of other rights that are violated within prisons, in my country, there's only one document that serves as your ID document. When you come out of the prisons, it's important. Without this identity document, it's impossible to do all of the things that you need to do. For example, you can't open a bank account, you can't rent an apartment, and it makes life that much more difficult. And this isn't something that you get when people are released from prison. They don't even get this identity document. And then it's a document that they also ask when you're looking to be hired for a job. They'll look at the criminal record, especially my brother really had trouble finding a job after he was released. He had a job that was waiting for him, and so he got lucky because he was able to rejoin the workforce. But there are many people who don't have a job waiting for them, and that it would be very difficult for them, and they don't have any support, and their rights are infringed upon within prison systems. In terms of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in Mexico, we know that there's the Inter-American Court resolution in which they're starting to examine the impact of prison transfers, transferring prisoners to areas that are more isolated. They're looking into the impact that this has on women and children, and family members. And I think that this is very important so that we can really make visible the stories of family members who are impacted and including children.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Before turning to our final speaker, I would just like to note a comment by Claudia Cardona in the chat. Claudia is one of the leaders of the Red Latinoamericano de Mujeres Libertarias Fundiendo Rejas, or the Latin American network of women who've been in prison. And she notes that after coming out of prison, when you're walking in the street, you're always afraid and fearful that you will run into the police and that they will take you back to prison. And that this fear is transmitted to her daughter, who also is now afraid of the police, and she concludes that this is just an absurd situation. Now I will turn to Leah Fernandez. As I mentioned, Leah is the person who very graciously helped pull together the video from the two kids we heard from before, and she is with the Plataforma NAPES, and you can say more about your background, Leah, if you would like. And after that, we will wrap up.
Buenos días, muchas gracias.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the space to speak, for giving the space to children and adolescents. For us, we thought it would be better to film them, to record them, because just like us, you know, they get quite nervous when they're presenting live. So we wanted to make sure that they felt more comfortable. I just wanted to quickly add, in terms of add to what Andrea was saying before, in terms of house arrest. And I think it's important to reflect on this because this is what we're going through right now with with Manuel's situation with his mother. And really, I would like to thank the solicitor who has been helping us very much in securing these rights for his family, his mother. And we should not idealize or romanticize house arrest as a final solution, a final measure that will work for situations like the one that Manuel's mother is in. We're currently working on advocacy to be able to ensure the basic necessary conditions so that this woman and her 4 children could be kept together and have access to everything they need. For example, food, because the mother is not able to leave her house, also to be able to access healthcare, to be able to access education, take children to schools. All of these needs require policies. They require norms that really safeguard and guarantee the rights of these children and their mothers, and who are under house arrest as an alternative measure to incarceration. So I just want to stress that we need to have more measures, we need to have more initiatives to be able to ensure that this alternative measure is actually feasible. Because sadly, many times mothers actually prefer to be in prison because at least there they have their basic needs met for sure. So once again, thank you so much for giving me this space.
Thank you very much, Leah. I would just like to close by saying thank you to all of our participants. There are many side events happening right now, particularly related to Latin America. We will be sharing recordings of this event in English and Spanish for those who haven't been able to see it, so you can share it with your colleagues. We'll circulate it next week. I would particularly like to thank all of our speakers who've taken the time to be with us today. This was an incredibly informative event, and I think got the right mix of analysis and hearing the personal side, the human face of this issue. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are very committed to continuing to bring attention to the issue of the disproportionate impact of drug-related incarceration on family members of people in prison. We will be continuing to work with Remove with the Plataforma NAPES and with the Latin American Network of Women who've been in prison, and hope that this will be the first of other forums where we can bring attention to the issue. So thank you all very much. And for those of you returning to the plenary of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, looks like we have many hours ahead, so get some more coffee. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Muchas gracias.